In the dusty village of Zango, there lived a woman named Zuri. She was poor, so poor that she had nothing to her name but the worn-out rags that barely covered her body. Her clothes were like patches of torn cloth that clung to her skin, offering no warmth or protection against the harsh winds that blew through the village. Her heart, too, was empty, like the hollow shell of a dried seed, battered by the storms of life. The roof of her hut leaked whenever it rained, and the cold winds howled through the gaps in her broken windows, mocking her every misfortune. Zuri had no bed. Every night, she would curl up on the hard, unforgiving ground, trying to sleep in whatever little warmth she could find. She prayed every night for a better life, but when the sun rose each morning, it greeted her with the same struggles, the same hunger, and the same loneliness. She did everything she could to survive. She fetched water for the villagers, washed their clothes, and worked on the farms. But no matter how hard she worked, her hands always returned empty. It was as if the world had turned its back on her. The women she grew up with had married well and had children to care for. They wore beautiful clothes, and their children laughed and played around them. But Zuri, she had no husband, no child, and no one to call her own. The villagers whispered behind her back, calling her cursed. They said she was born with bad luck. Even the men avoided her, afraid that her misfortune would rub off on them. Zuri walked through the village like a shadow, unnoticed, unloved, and unwanted. Yet, despite all this, she carried on, hoping that one day the sun would shine brighter on her life. But that day had not come, at least not yet. One sweltering afternoon, Zuri walked down to the river with a bundle of tattered clothes. The sun beat down fiercely, and the river sparkled like molten silver. Zuri knelt by the water, scrubbing her rags with hands as rough as the dirt roads of her village. The sound of rushing water was the only comfort she had. As she scrubbed, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, her heart skipping a beat. Standing tall and proud before her was a woman dressed in clothes so fine they seemed fit for a queen. Her skin glowed, her jewelry sparkled, and her smile was sharp, like a knife. "Good day," the woman said, her voice smooth like honey. Zuri blinked, unsure if she was dreaming. "Good day, ma'am," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman stepped closer, her eyes glinting with something Zuri couldn't quite place. "My name is Kyra," she said. "I've been watching you, Zuri. I know your struggles." Zuri's eyes widened. How did this stranger know her name? Kyra smiled knowingly, as if reading Zuri's thoughts. "I have a business proposition for you," she said. "It's simple and will change your life." Zuri's mind raced. What kind of business? Kyra reached into her bag and pulled out a bundle of crisp, folded notes. "You will collect used undergarments from the villagers. Bring as many as you can. For every load you bring to me, I will pay you handsomely." Zuri's jaw dropped. "Underwear?" she asked, confusion thick in her voice. "Yes," Kyra said firmly. "Don't ask questions. Just do as I say, and you will never be poor again." She handed Zuri the money, and without another word, she turned to leave. "I'll be waiting." Zuri sat by the river, clutching the money in her hand, her mind clouded with questions. What kind of business was this? Why underwear? She didn't understand, but the weight of the money in her palm was real, and for the first time in her life, hope stirred within her chest. She packed up her clothes and headed back to her hut, her heart pounding in her chest. What should she do next? The next morning, Zuri woke up with a plan. She knew that the villagers would become suspicious if she asked for only underwear, so she decided to make her trade seem ordinary. With the money Kyra had given her, Zuri went to the market and bought colorful buckets and bowls, big and small, each one gleaming brightly under the morning sun. When she returned to the village, she knocked on the first door. An old woman opened, squinting her eyes at Zuri. "Good morning, Mama," Zuri greeted, holding up a bright blue bucket. "I'm exchanging these for any old clothes, shoes, or undergarments you no longer need." The old woman grunted, looking at the bucket suspiciously. "Old clothes? Shoes? Underwear? What kind of business is that?" she asked. It's for a new venture, Zuri explained. If you have anything you're not using, I'll trade you this fine bucket. The old woman's eyes lit up at the sight of the shiny bucket. Without hesitation, she went inside and returned with a pile of old clothes, shoes, and a few worn-out undergarments. Thank you, Mama, Zuri said, smiling as she handed over the bucket. She repeated the process at every door she knocked on. At each house, the villagers eagerly handed over their unwanted items in exchange for Zuri's gleaming bowls and buckets. By the end of the day, Zuri's sack was full, bulging with clothes, shoes, and, most importantly, undergarments. That night, Zuri sat in her hut, carefully sorting through the items she'd collected. She separated the undergarments and placed them in a special sack. The rest of the clothes and shoes she took outside and burned in a hidden spot near the river, the flames crackling and consuming the evidence of her strange trade. The next day, Zuri took her sack of undergarments to Kyra by the river. Kyra greeted her with a smile, her eyes glinting as she took the sack. You've done well, Kyra said, her voice smooth as silk. She handed Zuri a thick bundle of money, and Zuri's heart soared as she clutched it. Thank you, Zuri whispered, her voice trembling with hope. Kyra smiled, her eyes sharp. Keep working, Zuri. Your life is about to change. And so, Zuri's trade continued. Each day, she ventured through the village, her buckets and bowls gleaming under the sun, and each day, she collected more undergarments. The villagers remained clueless about the dark secret hidden beneath her newfound success. The once poverty-stricken Zuri began to repair her hut. She replaced the leaking roof with sturdy palm leaves and covered the broken windows. She even bought herself new clothes, bright and colorful like the women she had once envied. For the first time, Zuri could eat well. No more begging or struggling. Her days of hunger were over. The villagers noticed her transformation and began to talk. Look at Zuri, they whispered. She's no longer the poor woman we once knew. Perhaps her business is truly blessed. But while Zuri's days were filled with laughter and trade, her nights were filled with guilt. Every night, as the village slept, she would quietly gather her sacks of undergarments. Like a shadow, she would slip through the narrow paths, heading toward the river, where Kyra waited. Zuri knew she could never go back. There was no turning back from what she had done. The villagers celebrated her success, but Zuri knew she had traded more than just undergarments. She had sold her soul. One night, Zuri's neighbor, Tinu, who was known for her sharp eyes and curious nature, decided to follow her. She had always wondered where Zuri went each night, and this time, she was determined to find out. Wrapped in a thick shawl, Tinu followed Zuri through the dark streets, staying hidden behind trees and bushes. Finally, they reached the river. Tinu crouched low, peeking through the tall grass, and saw a figure sitting on a large rock by the riverbank. It was Kyra, her glowing robes reflecting faintly in the moonlight. Candles flickered around her in a perfect circle. Zuri approached, dropping her sack of undergarments in front of Kyra without saying a word. Kyra opened the sack and began to pull out the undergarments, pushing the rest of the clothes aside. She began to chant in a low, rhythmic voice, and the air around her seemed to thicken. Tinu's breath caught in her throat as she watched. Suddenly, the undergarments vanished into thin air, leaving behind a faint, eerie glow. A strange laughter echoed through the night, sending chills down Tinu's spine. Tinu couldn't move. Her legs felt as if they were rooted to the ground, and the laughter echoed in her mind as she quietly retreated, her heart pounding in her chest. The next day, Tinu couldn't keep her secret any longer. She rushed to the village elders, her face pale with fear. "It's Zuri," she cried. "She's been working with a witch. She's been collecting undergarments from all of us and giving them to a strange woman by the river. I saw it with my own eyes." The elders gathered immediately in the village square, their faces grim. They called Zuri forward. "What have you done, Zuri?" they demanded. Zuri hesitated. Her heart thudded in her chest. The guilt weighed on her like an anchor, and tears welled up in her eyes. She had no choice but to confess. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I've been collecting undergarments from you all for a woman named Kyra. She promised me riches and success, but now I see. I see the evil I've unleashed." The chief elder stood tall, his voice firm. "We must destroy the witch and undo the damage she has caused." The villagers, angry and fearful, armed themselves with torches and sticks, ready to confront Kyra. They marched toward the river, led by the chief elder. When they arrived at the baobab tree, the place where the spirits of the village were said to dwell, they found Kyra waiting for them. She stood, unafraid, as if she had known they would come. "You cannot defeat me," she hissed, her eyes glowing with malice. "You are all beneath me." But the chief elder, holding his staff high, began to chant. The air grew thick with magic. Slowly, the spirits of the earth rose, wrapping around Kyra like tendrils. She screamed, her body writhing as her power faded, and the villagers worked together to destroy the cursed relics that had kept her magic strong. With a final chant, Kyra collapsed, powerless. The villagers bound her to the baobab tree, and there, they left her to face the consequences of her actions. When she was gone, the village stood in silence. Zuri stood in the distance, watching. The guilt in her heart was unbearable. She had played her part in the suffering of the village, and now there was no way to undo what had been done. Tinu, however, had been brave enough to expose the truth. She was celebrated for her courage, and the king's son, hearing of her bravery, took her as his wife. As for Zuri, she left the village. She had no place there anymore, no purpose. Her soul had been tainted by greed, and there was no forgiveness for her. But Zuri's story became a lesson. The elders spoke of it often, reminding the children that sometimes evil comes disguised as opportunity, and that greed can blind the heart, leading to destruction. Zango was free from the curse, but the story of Zuri, the woman who had traded her soul for wealth, would be passed down through generations. It was a tale of warning, a tale of redemption lost and lessons learned too late.